Okay, welcome back, everybody. So maybe there's still a few stragglers out on the patio. I don't know if everybody's back in, but we'll go ahead and get started with our last panel of the afternoon. Really excited to welcome really a dream team of Notre Dame communicators up here to help refocus the conversation a little bit, not leaving behind the technical questions, but really bringing in some of the larger questions about communications practice and communications leadership, and what that looks like and how we're sort of adapting to this changing reality. So before we do that, I wanted to take just a moment, though I know as the afternoon is wearing on a little bit here, maybe we need a little bit of energy, a little more stretching. So I'm guessing there's still somebody here that you have not met yet. So find a person that you have not met yet or interacted with, and take a moment to talk to that person about who looks to you for advice about questions about AI. So this might be a formal role that you have. Maybe you within your organization or your team are actually going to be a person sort of setting standards about what to use, when to use it, and how to use it when it comes to using AI tools. So maybe it's a formal role, maybe it's an informal role at home with kids, informally with colleagues, things like that. So take a minute, find somebody, talk to them about who looks to you for leadership on these questions. Okay, as you're headed back to your seats, I'm curious to know what kinds of leadership you talked about. Does anybody want to shout out loud for us to hear? Oh, with the mic. So the mic's going to come around. You can just tell us briefly about the type of leadership that you discussed. Who's looking to you for leadership and how? Somebody want to put your hand up and the mic will come around.
So when you initially asked this question, I was like, oh crap, I'm not a leader in AI, and hopefully nobody's coming to me for anything. But then I realized, so I'm a faculty member here at Notre Dame, and so I do have a research group and graduate students who, although they haven't yet, I anticipate they'll start asking questions about when it's appropriate to use AI when writing term papers or publications or preparing figures and things like that. And also, I was talking to my mother on the way here this morning and telling her what I was doing, and she told me I had to go tell her everything I know about AI after this because she doesn't want to be left behind.
Okay, great, thank you. Others?
I'm a biologist and I don't currently use AI in my lab, but as an artist, I get a lot of questions from other artists or people engaging with the art world about how people should use AI in terms of art and public domain in that space.
Okay, great. Others?
I'm also faculty here, so it's been pretty just like informal conversations with colleagues and other teaching faculty about developing policies for ourselves and what do we want to allow our students to use, where do we want to draw the line, and kind of looking at what are best practices within our courses.
Okay, great. Great. Can we get one more?
I'm a professor of chemistry and biochemistry at Indiana University, South Bend, so just about 3 miles away from here. Most of the students I teach are undergraduates, and they come to me with questions about AI. And just in our field, in terms of the scientific field, we have actually been able to use AI in the classroom in different ways, and in the research lab as well, for things like drug development or protein design, protein engineering, and it just makes things much faster. So I'm by no means an expert on AI, but there's some really great tools, and the idea is just to use it as a tool, just like any new thing that's come up. It's going to make mistakes, and we have to be there to figure out where we can use it best and make those decisions. So helping students make those decisions I think is the most fun part of it.
Okay, awesome, thanks. So any of those sort of burning questions that you have about this communications leadership role, kind of keep those in mind, and we'll make sure and have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, but I'll introduce our dream team here of Notre Dame communicators. So I'm Brett Beasley, by the way. I'm the writer and editorial program manager for Notre Dame Research. Next to me is Josh Weinhold, who is the director of communications and marketing for Notre Dame's oldest and largest college, the College of Arts and Letters. So Josh develops the college's strategic communications plan and oversees all of its news, print, and electronic publications and promotions, including social media, video, special events, and over 100 websites. Next to Josh is Deanna Ferrell. Deanna is a term assistant teaching professor here and the senior assistant director of marketing communications in the College of Science. So in addition to helping lead communications at the College of Science, Deanna is also an instructor for Principles of Science Communication, a writing intensive course that is cross-listed, so it's taken both by science majors and by students in our journalism minor. Next to Deanna is Beth Grisoli. Beth is the Assistant Vice President of Strategic Communications here at Notre Dame. In addition to leading and managing Notre Dame's brand content, internal communications, and media relations teams, she also provides the vision and strategy for projects like Notre Dame's well-known, award-winning What Would You Fight For series. If you've watched a Notre Dame football game, you've probably seen one. So it airs on NBC to millions of viewers every home football game, I believe. Next to her is Andy Fuller. Andy is the Executive Director of Brand Content here at Notre Dame. And Andy leads a really highly creative internal team that develops these signature stories. So sometimes they're written features, sometimes videos, sometimes podcasts that really capture what is distinctive about Notre Dame as a community of inquiry, faith, and fellowship. So to get you introduced to our panelists, I thought I'd kick things off by asking them an initial question about how did you get introduced to these technologies, specifically generative AI? Would you characterize yourself as a person who went and sought out these technologies or sort of hesitant in adopting them? And I think we'll just have you jump in as you see fit.
Sure, I'll go first. Late adopter, very late adopter. I wasn't quite so bad that I was going to need to hit up my parents for information on this stuff, but it's pretty close. I mean, very late adopter. I think when it really landed on my radar was about a year ago. We were working on a video project, and someone used AI to get started on a script, just as a starting point. And that's when I think it was impressed upon me, like, yeah, this is something that we should look at incorporating in our day-to-day work where it makes sense and where we feel that we're on the right side of ethical issues. So been about a year, which is probably later than I think many of you in the room came to the technology, but that's my story.
I was fairly early, but I think that sometimes we think about AI as ChatGPT or these bigger AI sorts of programs, but anytime that you use autocorrect, right, it's AI. I came to it through Otter AI, and who in here is a writer or a lecturer uses Otter AI? Do you know what that is? So I like it because as a writer, I'm able to capture what people say in an interview, and I don't have to worry about going back and transcribing every single word after, which can take off hours and hours of my time. Now, every once in a while, it'll throw in random words and things that aren't really applicable to the conversation. But by and large, I found that to be really useful. So when there was all the chatter about the new ChatGPT and stuff, I kind of went on right away and tried it out. And in fact, I do allow my students in my course to use it to some degree. I developed some different exercises where they have to compare their own writing with writing that they've gotten off of ChatGPT. And in some cases, this is the first class that they've had a professor allowing them to use it. But my theory was, I know you're using it anyway, so we may as well talk about it. I didn't want to put it in a box.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, late adopter, fully confessing there. But again, that's speaking particularly about generative AI. I've always been big on using it for transcripts. I do a lot of interviews, even meetings on Zoom where I pre-interview people that are going to be in a video story, and I can use that to use their actual words to write scripts later. I'm laughing because I think I know the exact meeting you're talking about with the script. And we were just messing around with ChatGPT in this brainstorm, and we're like, okay, let's write a 30-second audio script about Notre Dame in the style of Ernest Hemingway. And that's how we sort of just started playing. And then we said, okay, now make it Robert Frost. And it got the conversation going. We didn't use any of it, but it started us, kind of just broke the ice, got us laughing, started on an idea, and it was a great launch for a brainstorm. But I would have to say, probably one of the reasons I don't use it much is that I honestly enjoy writing. I love writing. I love the process. I love staring at the blank page and looking at as, where am I going to go with this? I love putting it away and coming back to it to revise and revise. So that's me. And I know there are tons of people who don't. They'd sooner go to the dentist than have to write something. So I think that's part of one of the reasons I am a late adopter, and I still only really use certain tools.
Yeah, similarly, I'm a late adopter. I'm one who can skeptically roll my eyes anytime a new social media platform or piece of technology like this comes along, and I'm tempted to wait to see if it sticks around first. But thankfully, have members of my team who are much more eager and interested in it than I am, and my video producer and graphic designer and digital strategist love experimenting with these types of things, and especially when Adobe came out with their new set of AI tools, they were already talking about what it was capable of and how they had experimented with it before I even had the chance to ask them about what they thought of it and its innovations. And I think that experimentation is really helpful to understand what it's capable of before you actually even need to use it for anything.
Okay, great. I thought from there we would just jump right into trying to make this an open space where we can actually talk about some fears that we might have. If you had to say, as a communicator, a steward of the creative process, both yourself and working with others, what would you say is there something about it that keeps you up at night, and what is that?
I would not say it keeps me up at night at all, thankfully. But I will say, last year, Reagan Communications, anybody who works in the communications field would know this organization, but Reagan Communications did a survey of communication specialists, and they asked them what their biggest fears were about generative AI. And the number one fear of communications professionals was losing the personal touch in communications, followed closely by perpetuating misinformation and inaccuracies. And I thought that was really interesting because trailing behind that was data security and ethics. So you do that survey with IT professionals, you do that survey with finance professionals, you're going to get very different answers. But honestly, I think I'm very much in line with that, of the losing the human and personal soul of content. And I would say my ethics part comes much farther up the chain than that survey. But my big fear is that many things will become very formulaic, and that everything, I thought it was interesting that Dan earlier had said he puts his class assignments into ChatGPT, then he grades them. And almost always they come up as C or C minus. And I said to myself, well, that's what we might all end up as, average, racing to this mean. And that's my fear, one of my big fears.
As a user of it occasionally, so I write about all different kinds of science in the College of Science. So I've got physics, life sciences, different types of chemistry. I am not good at material science. I don't grasp it very well. It's a very difficult subject for me. So if I talk to a professor during an interview, and maybe I've asked them a few different ways about their work, what it means, and I'm still not quite getting what I need, and we have a short window to talk, I will go to ChatGPT and say, hey, explain this to me like I'm 12. And it usually starts with, hey, so let's get started. You know, I mean, it's always like the same sort of tone. But sometimes that'll give me some, and then I look back at my notes and it'll give me some kind of additional words or thoughts that I can use as I'm kind of wading through a very difficult paper to write. My fear, however, is that I'll become, that I'll start writing like that, right? You know, which is not my goal. My goal is just kind of information seeking, like a live dictionary, like kind of help me with this concept. And I feel like I should be wearing like a little cloak and hiding out in a closet because I feel guilty. Like, I'm a writer, why am I using this tool? Why am I looking this up? So that's my fear, is that, you know, I just don't want it to become my voice. And I don't use it enough to really have that fear, but it's something I think about.
My fear primarily is not so much about how we as communicators should or shouldn't use it, or how people in similar walks of life to us may or may not use it. It's the more nefarious actors. And as communicators who are trying to drive a brand or a message or tell stories with certain goals in mind, the way AI could undermine that. We had an incident that was pretty shocking earlier this year where we published a feature story on an arts and letters undergraduate student. She actually ended up being valedictorian this year. So it was this great feature about all her research and international experiences and everything she had done so far. And a day or two later, my Google alerts pinged, and there was some website that clearly in the Google alert, I could tell it was a story about the same student, and it sounded kind of like ours, but it wasn't. They hadn't just scraped our content, copied and pasted it onto their site, and it was this clearly AI-generated content mill of a website that had taken our story and kind of regurgitated it, put a different headline on it that wasn't quite right, and also had an AI-generated photo at the top of the story that did not look anything like this student. I would say was not like the type of look we would want to put forward as a type of student we have at Notre Dame. It was just really unnerving because it also gave me pause to think about, oh my goodness, this student has entrusted us with her story to tell, to showcase the value of a Notre Dame liberal arts education and all the great things she's achieved. What might it do if this becomes the norm, where once something is kind of out there in the public, it could be twisted or misinterpreted and put back out in a way that's not reflective of the message we want to be telling or what this student would want out in the world when she was interviewing for consulting jobs or whatever she was looking for after graduation. Thankfully, somehow that site got shut down and doesn't exist anymore, but it was this kind of reminder of not just what happens with AI content that we're using when we're generating it through this software, but what can happen when we put something out into the world and then kind of lose control of it after the point that we hit publish.
I had forgotten about that incident, Josh, so
too.
thank you. Now
Me
I have
too.
two fears.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah.
What I was going to mention, though, and this is just purely from the standpoint of someone working in communications and higher education, I'm afraid we're going to look stupid. And the reason I say that, if you think about trust in higher education, it continues to erode, continues to erode, continues to erode. One of the areas where the public actually trusts us is in getting AI right and making sure we're leveraging AI for the common good. That trust can be eroded really quickly when we use AI as the sole means for drafting a letter on a sensitive topic like DEI, which happened at a university. Or when we use AI to generate an image celebrating the 4th of July, but they used the wrong flag,
Oh, yeah.
which happened at a university. So that's the thing that I'm worried we're going to succumb to the temptation to use AI to lead content generation instead of supporting it. We're all asked to do so much more with so much less these days. And man, the ability to just have something generate, like, cool, now I can move that off my plate, that worries me. That's a fear.
And as an instructor as well, obviously, who's an instructor in here? And how many times have you suspected that somebody used AI for some paper that you had for your class? And then how could you prove that? That's the problem, you know, and occasionally, and as an instructor, like, I wanted them to kind of play with it, but not use it for papers. There was one time where I could pretty much tell that this one particular student probably used it because this paper did not sound like the rest of the papers that student had written. And all I could really do was say, wow, I really like your lead and your net graph, your second paragraph. Some of these other paragraphs, that does not sound like your voice. You know, I had to kind of like rein that in. And obviously, in an academic institution, we want students to be able to think on their own and not just generate something out of a computer like that. And so we haven't caught up, our tools have not caught up sometimes right now to be able to tell if there's plagiarism from ChatGPT or from other things. So that's a concern that I have.
So to sort of pick up a little bit on what Andy mentioned about resources, I don't think I've ever met a communications professional who was happy with the level of resources or didn't feel like they could do more if given a little bit more resources, right? So thinking about if you can tell us where is an area where you would love to see greater help from AI that would allow you to do something maybe you're not currently able to do with your size of team, or produce a different type of content or something, achieve some goal. So we were just talking a little bit about fears. So can we talk a little bit about hopes? Where would we like to see it develop more?
Yeah, funny that you should ask that. We're actually participating in our OIT department here at the university is starting a whole pilot program because we had a whole task force. So I don't know if anybody in here was on that. I was on that. But anyway, we had a whole task force at the university to evaluate where Notre Dame stood, what we needed to do, what our priorities are. And obviously, you know, the top three things that kept coming up against this, in this very broad interdisciplinary group across campus was literacy, AI literacy, especially for students, ethics, always something we discuss at Notre Dame through every subject, and transparency. And so, again, we are by no means on the cutting edge of jumping into a lot of this, but we are starting a pilot program where they're giving licenses out to various departments, and you can have seats to play in the space and experiment. And so our team, Andy's a part of my team as well, so our team, we have a few seats we've just added, and we're going to start playing with, our copy editor is going to just experiment with proofreading and copy editing tools. She does it all by hand now, and she's very good at it, but, you know, is it reliable? Is it accurate? You know, things like that. You can probably speak more to, actually, Stacy happened to pop in the room. She's going to be one of our seats to experiment with it as well. And you want to talk about what she's going to do?
Yeah. So this is kind of a use case example, but for us, AI, the way we're currently thinking about it, two very, very broad buckets. One is in data analysis, and the other is breaking the tyranny of the blank page for the writers in the room, right? Beth apparently likes the blank page. This is why we work well together. I think it's tyranny. You know, the idea that it can help you get started going in a certain direction creatively is really appealing. You know, we had a member of our team who said, hey, there's 2,500 pages of intel on how Google prioritizes SEO. I asked ChatGPT to summarize the findings. Here's what I found. That's really useful. I mean, that large-scale data analysis is really where we're spending a lot of our time in generative AI. There's another example from Arizona State University where they actually built a tool on their website for people to help find the degree that they want to pursue at the university. They have over 800, which when you think about it, that's kind of a large data set for someone pursuing a degree. And so they asked them questions like, what do you want work to look like after you're done here? And through these types of questions, like, here's some degrees that may appeal to you. That seems like a really interesting use of AI. And it's going to take communicators, because we're the ones who know that words matter. And so how you frame those questions, so important for the outcome that you're seeking there. So there's a lot of hope around this. It's just a matter of calibrating the right uses of it.
Yeah, I think my hopes are just that it can continue to make work easier. Not replace the creative work of communications, but make that work easier. And we're seeing it already. I mean, pretty basic level type of stuff. But with Adobe's tools, I mean, in a video, we had a student who, unfortunately, on the day of a shoot, wore a polo with a very unfortunate logo on it that we wanted to remove. And so then the act of getting that out of the video was a lot less painstaking than it could have been otherwise. Or creating imagery when a stock library just doesn't quite have the thing that we're looking for. Or thinking about how words can be best presented on a website. I don't know, to Andy's point about looking stupid, I can trust it to write annoying emails for me yet. But like if it could do the repetitive tasks in a way that we can trust and then free up more time for the creative process rather than replacing the creative process, I think that's the best case scenario.
So we're kind of moving then into thinking about these particular use cases, which I think is great, rather than talking about whether to use the technology, whether making the technology itself good or bad, but rather talking about particular use cases. Maybe some people have seen recently Ted Chiang in the New Yorker argued that you should not use ChatGPT for your first draft. So I'll read you what his reasoning behind this. He said, "Your first draft is not an unoriginal idea expressed clearly. It's an original idea expressed poorly. And it's accompanied by your amorphous dissatisfaction, your awareness of the distance between what it says and what you want it to say." So planting his flag a little bit there on this particular use case, don't use it for your first draft. And just because, sort of like Beth was saying earlier, I think a little bit, that human touch being really important. So I would invite our panel to plant your flag on a particular use case. Don't use generative AI for this. Or if you want to take it in a positive direction and say, definitely use it for this.
What comes to mind immediately is crisis communications.
Yes.
Do not use it in a crisis. So that's an easy one for me.
I go to images for a couple reasons. It's one thing to maybe you can use it to visualize what you have in your head, and that gets you started in writing something, or maybe helps you think of a creative style that then you hire a photographer to go produce. But if you think about some of the ethical questions around just using AI-generated images, first of all, you know, they're getting better all the time, but they're not perfect yet. And so you could wind up with a person with 6 fingers or something like that. I mean, there's some weirdness out there still, too. But, you know, AI is creating like a composite of everything it's seeing on the internet, which means it's someone else's work that they're pulling into this thing. And it's potentially taking work from someone you might hire to take that photo, too. So, to me, where we're kind of landing is almost this sort of do no harm approach, especially, you know, making it human-centric. If it can improve human endeavor, make it more efficient, I think that's awesome. I think that's great. If it starts taking work away, you know, not to go there, I know that's sometimes a fear, but there is some serious questions around that. That's where I really start to draw a line in the creative space.
I would just agree with don't use it for a first draft. I cannot imagine, you know, doing a first draft of anything in AI because it's not. I wouldn't feel like it would ever be mine at that point. No matter how much I changed it, I would be so influenced by that first draft that it would no longer feel like me.
Yeah, I like the idea that, well, that the point of AI is to help make an idea better, not to have the original idea itself. And so we don't want to get to the point where writing is just kind of the base common denominator as you described. But when it comes to thinking about how to organize information on a website, or, you know, gathering all sorts of vast amounts of information to figure out the best way to do something in a way that we may not be able to come up with ourselves, I think is really helpful and beneficial.
So I wonder then if we can shift a little bit to thinking about some gray areas that are out there for us. Where do we need guidance? You know, where do we need guidance maybe from regulation, from our institutions? What areas would you like to have a lot more help than you have in navigating?
When I think of guidance from this, and of course, the brand guy is going to say this. I honestly think this is why we need brands. And that sounds like a weird way to approach this, but what brands help us do, I mean, we define brand here at the university as just why you matter. I mean, it's why people should care about you. It's kind of the summary, the distillation of your values, your strategy, that sort of thing. It's why, again, why you matter. And you know, I know there are some, maybe a representative from Purdue University, Indiana University. Those are our colleagues here in the state of Indiana. Purdue articulates its brand by saying the persistent pursuit, right? And when you think about that, that can start to give you a clue of how they might approach AI. I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth or something, but that's just an example of how a brand can articulate how you approach these emerging issues. IU is Bring On Tomorrow, and that you can see there maybe a starting point for how they might tackle this. We don't articulate the brand that succinctly here at Notre Dame, although we're getting there. But the one phrase we like to use here is a means for good. That helps us, and that comes from a letter our founder wrote in 1842. That helps us kind of frame our thinking around some of these issues. And it does provide, I think, a useful starting point in the case of AI. So your brand can actually be a useful framework to start thinking about how should we as a university attack this issue. Well, who are we? Why do we matter in the world? And your brand helps kind of point the way in that endeavor.
I wouldn't mind explicit permission to play. I think a lot of times institutions at different locations absolutely say you may not use this, you may not try this, and then you feel guilty if you kind of do want to try it. I think it would be great for a variety of institutions to have, you know, a highly suggested training program. Maybe it's not mandatory for everyone, it's not useful for everyone's life necessarily, but creating some programs where you have the opportunity to go in and try. Mr. Farkas had, you know, a whole list of different types of AI that you could try, that he's tried out and has liked. And I think it would be great to have that opportunity to have like a little sandbox of here are these different tools, and then you can decide what may work for you or what you never want to try again.
Right, really a common set, or also a common set of guidelines,
Yes.
so that we're all playing in that same sandbox and
Yes.
understand what is or isn't acceptable and what needs to be labeled or doesn't as
Yeah.
AI generated. Because we don't, my team, we don't label every time we use a piece of stock imagery or
Sure.
stock photography unless it's required, but thinking about AI in the same way so that everyone's playing by the same set of rules, I think is really helpful.
I would like, I guess, to know, more about legal and copyright and intellectual property, you know, law. And not just law, though. I mean, because we've steered away. In our central communications group, we don't create images. We don't use it for designs or anything like that. We're lucky that we have a team of artists who can do that because we want it to really reflect the mission of Notre Dame, really reflect our spirit, the soul of the university. But knowing where the lines are there a little bit better would be helpful. But even the fact for me, and this is me, I would love, we have centers for ethics here on campus. I'd love to get teams of people together and really comb through ethical questions about just because it's legal, is it right? You know, when you work as a content producer and you manage content producers who work very hard to create their own work, you're very protective of it. And so, you know, a lot of these artists that are, you know, their work is out on the internet a lot now, and they're very famous now, and they're getting their style lifted pretty much and copied. I feel for them, you know, not that somebody couldn't do that by hand, but it's a little different when a computer does it in a matter of a minute. So I don't know, I think I would love to have a real sit down and a group get together on campus and ask these really tough questions about, you know, is it okay to make up a design, a piece of art that looks like whatever it is, your story you're trying to tell in the style of, you know, Frida? I mean, is that okay? So my gut says, I don't want to do that, but I think it's worth a conversation.
In 2013, Google, in order to figure out how to create this large language model, they scraped all of I don't know how many of you have heard of the Gannett newspaper company. South Bend Tribune is part of it, Indianapolis Star. They used to be a really big network. Now journalism has mostly been gutted. But they went through and scraped all of the digital information from all of the newspapers that any journalist wrote during that time. They spent years and years and years scraping this information. So a lot of the stuff that you're finding on ChatGPT or in this generative AI could have been scraped years ago, and people didn't even know that it was happening. So looking at this from a university standpoint, and I was discussing with somebody, like, I feel like universities are so late to the game because companies have been working on this for so much time that we've almost lost control of it in a way. How do we get that back?
Well, and your point is interesting that it's been scraped from years ago. Well, it doesn't have the most recent data. I mean, it hasn't been, so don't trust it to be accurate and have the latest information on anything. It could be very dated, but it's being perpetuated as, the fact.
And it could have scraped wrong information.
Yeah,
Journalists make mistakes.
Yeah, or biased information.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things right now, which is why you always have to have a human filter. Because, depending on the subject matter, there might be a point of view that is reflected much more clearly, or is just in terms of volume is much more present on the internet than others.
Right.
Okay, great. Well, so at this point we have about 15 minutes, and I really want to open it up now. I know you had a minute earlier thinking about yourself as a communications leader in some formal or informal way. So feel free. We have our panel of experts. We have a lot of accumulated experience up here. Bring your problems, bring your questions, and let's talk through them together.
So I'm really curious about that case of the article you published of the girl who went on to be valedictorian and the article got scraped onto another website. I was wondering, like, before it got taken down, was there anything you were doing? Like, is there anything you could do about that?
I asked around immediately, and Beth and Andy and their colleagues and general counsel basically said no. I mean, because it wasn't a copyright, there wasn't any actual intellectual property that was taken, because it wasn't like they were just reprinting the article in its entirety or then using that to misrepresent it. It was unfortunately just out there. The site doesn't exist anymore, which is beneficial. And it was funny, I looked through there. It was a tech-focused kind of content mill, so they had grabbed a couple of other Notre Dame-related stories, and one was about this robotic football competition that had happened on campus, and that also had an AI-generated image with it, but the robots looked ridiculous, and the people in it did all have 6 fingers. So I feel like a reader would immediately understand what that was and what it wasn't. It was a little more unnerving when it was just focused on one student, but there was kind of this sense of helplessness there and concern. Thankfully, everyone else I've talked to on campus who are communicators hadn't seen anything else like that happening, and it hasn't happened again. But it was it was a fear that I didn't know I should have that suddenly was realized in that moment, because thinking, especially about students, faculty research would be its own problem, but thinking about telling the stories of students was particularly troubling when it came to that.
Is this on? Yeah, okay. So I'm a communication researcher. And I think the question of the letter that was containing DEI and the image that was scraped that didn't send the message that you as communicators wanted to send is really interesting, because when I look at a Pulitzer Prize story, as a communicator, I see layers. So there's layers of technique, there's layers of theory, how you structure the sentence, all kinds of things are in there that we see, but other people who look at that see a story. It might be a good story, right? You can get a good story off ChatGPT. But my fear is what will be lost is what's invisible to people who are not not in the communication field, and yet they feel it, right? If you read a Pulitzer Prize story, it moves you. It moves you because of those layers of, experience that the writers have, the techniques that they know how to use, they've tried specifically with the audiences they're trying to tailor it to, and the theories that are behind it. But those are all like invisible, right? They're invisible unless you study communication as a science and as an art. And so I worry with ChatGPT, right, that yes, you can have it write a press release, right? Does it have the same impact as someone who has worked a beat for 20 years? They know their audience, they know, what's compelling. They can structure a picture that really resonates in a way that, some generic picture is not going to. And my fear is that, I don't know, I don't work in computers. Can AI replicate that level of expertise that's not visible to most people? And so when you're hiring, right, it's easy to hire, geez, I can have an undergraduate run this story on ChatGPT. And so this level of expertise, I'm afraid, will go away because it's not seen by most people. So what are your thoughts on that? And can AI do that? I'm also new to, I use Otter AI for transcription, right? And my students have used ChatGPT, and they're pretty mediocre stories, right? And there's tells in the citations, but so what are your thoughts on that?
I guess, I agree with you 100%. It's really strongly I agree with you. They're algorithms, right? I'm not really techie at all. I know very little about this part of it, but they're algorithms. So there've got to be certain things you just can't teach an algorithm. And one of them is ethical decisions, I would think. Maybe you can, but then you have to get to the point of like, okay, whose ethics do we teach it? But so I don't know that you're ever going to be able to teach it ethics. I don't know that you're ever going to be able to teach it a personal style that's individual, because it's not. It's not individual. It's a conglomerate, it seems to me. So maybe if it's only scraping really high quality work all the time, maybe then it could work and really be a high level of content, but it's not doing that. So it's getting all, the garbage in with the really good. So it's like, as I said, my fear is it's just gonna be mediocre a lot of times.
And it can't tell individual people's stories. That machine, that program, that algorithm does not know my story. It does not know the story of the person I'm interviewing. It does not know the story of the student whose information kind of got out there. I think that in the end, no matter how smart these generative AIs get, they cannot tell the story. They cannot interview the person. They cannot interview the scientist. They cannot interview the cancer patient. I think that that's where we really have to put the humanity in our own work to make sure that our own work and our stories and other people's stories are shining through.
Thank you. Along those lines, I teach writing, so thank you for unlocking some new fears today that I didn't know I have, possibly quite naively. I teach feature writing, and I've thought, for the past couple of years as AI started to advance, interviews are required, the personal touch is required, we're good. But what's to stop a student from loading their transcript into an AI tool and generating a story? So that's my new fear unlocked today. I'm sure my students have used these tools, but I have no idea, honestly. I don't know what to look for. Obviously, writing expertise and quality varies by student. So I guess my question is, as a teacher, I'm just kind of like wondering what objectives I should have for the students in this area. Is it, do I try to teach these proper uses like through an ethics conversation, or, how do I guide that?
Sure. I would say, sure, that sounds great. I would think, depends on, you're teaching feature writing. That's different from, information, like the weather report that you just need to get out there on social to warn people there's going to be a thunderstorm. Feature writing should be unique. You should be proud of what you created at the end of it. When you have it, it's your work, and you own it, and it's part of you, went into it. As Deanna said, so whatever the subject is, you dig hard enough in your life for the people you have some connection to it, usually. And you'll bring that to it, and no one else will have the same connection. So I guess I would say, you're preaching to the choir here, so I'm not a great advice giver on this. And some people are going to receive that challenge from you well. I'm hoping that because they signed up for the course, that they are more apt to take, pride in original work. And that's all I can say.
Well, I like the example Deanna provided earlier. There's the literacy component to it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't ignore it and pretend like it's not there. What's important would be to instill in students from the earliest point possible an understanding of when is and is not a beneficial or acceptable use of using this tool, because it's a tool that's out there. They have an awareness of it, they're using it, so then to understand where their human creative capacity lies and then where they can use a digital tool to enhance that, or to just totally reject that is important. And to have, like you said, a conversation or an understanding in that early educational setting, what's good and what's not.
And maybe there should be some scene setting, so where they have to describe the person, the room, the situation. Maybe some of their assignments require them to go out into the field. Like if I'm writing a story on a scientist, I want to go into her lab and see what she's got on the walls and see what things are, and make that a component of the story, because that will be hard to replicate if they just dump in all of their text from Otter AI.
I love that. And the other, so that's feature writing. The other similar type of strategy I've heard about for like cover letters, which would be very easy. Most people hate writing cover letters, right? And so that's where we're seeing a lot of AI-generated stuff. I've heard of hiring managers saying in like the job description, you have to include the word watermelon in the third paragraph or something like that, just to sort of try to mitigate some of the AI stuff. But it comes back to what's something that only a person can do here, and trying to figure that out.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up cover letters. I think that's a perfect example of knowing when to use it and when to not.
Yeah.
Last year I was hiring for a position and I read 2 cover letters that seemed to have kind of the exact same format, because in the 4th paragraph they started talking about the mission and vision of arts and letters, but not in terms that we use anywhere on our website, and weren't like commonly accepted paraphrases. And it flipped the switch in my mind, thinking that maybe there was a certain formula being followed there. But then you read lots of terrible cover letters that would benefit from having been run through ChatGPT in the first place to improve them. And so there's that balance there where there's too much, but then there's not enough either.
Yeah, well, mine is just to just communicate my feeling, because communication actually is value exchanges. You are trying to push out what is in you, all right? And most of the time when you are communicating, everything about you actually can be involved. Your spirit, your soul, your mind, your knowledge, experience, and feelings, okay? But it looks like AI doesn't have most of these things. because they are programmed, and therefore so many things will be lost if I'm trying to pass across, if AI is, for example, passing across information that normally a human being would have passed across. The fact that the human being knows, okay, the person before me, I need to be nice, I need to get him on board to feel the way I feel, and I change my value because I want something from the person too. If you smile at me, that there's likelihood that you will smile back at me and you give me probably what I didn't even expect. So with AI, I don't know how we are going to do it because I will say this last. I'm from Nigeria and Africa. If AI is just coming in trickles, you can't even notice it now, except for those of us that are working in offices. In fact, in some centers, some traditional religious, they said AI is coming to destroy the whole world. So that's their feeling. So why am I saying all this? That we should go in with two approaches. Because I'm a communicator now, and all the lessons I learned here, I'm taking back home. I will use AI when I have to use AI, and I will not use AI when I don't have to use AI. I will just because my audience, like the topic ahead of us, my audience is the hero. So if the audience is the hero, I will choose when to use AI, and I will choose when not to use AI. That's just my feeling. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Can I just leave people? I don't know how much time we have left, but I brought something that it's not my idea, but I think it's a really interesting way to think about AI. And I was at a presentation. Andy was there actually too, and this came from the chief comms person at Yale School of Medicine, and she said you have to think of AI as a teenager. And I don't know if anybody's ever thought about this or heard about this before, but it was really interesting when she started saying this. She said, it needs structure, it needs boundaries, it needs directions. Sometimes it lies to you. It's not trustworthy. It's very expensive, as we were talking, Tanya was talking earlier about how costly it is, and it doesn't know what it wants to be when it grows up yet. So
everyone's going to parent it differently, which causes problems for your use of it too.
So I think we just all have to take a little bit of comfort in this is new. And we're going to figure our way through it.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Will you join me in thanking our panelists?